Hello everyone, and welcome to our channel. Today, we delve into the eerie and unexplained, exploring the scariest events in people's lives that continue to haunt them. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more spine-chilling content. There was a girl next door to my grandparents' house that I had the biggest crush on. Her name was Becca. We had known each other from the time I was really little. We were both coming into the age of liking the opposite sex at the same time, and we had similar troubled childhoods. Becca lived with her grandparents, too. Somewhere after holding hands, but before a first kiss, Becca gave me a ring. She borrowed it from her grandpa and needed it back the next day. I was on cloud 9. With excitement, I showed my mom the ring. She asked my grandparents to borrow their truck and told me to get in and make sure I brought the ring. I had no idea what was going on. We pulled up to the jewelry store at Eureka and Telegraph, and she asked to see the ring. She went inside, no kids were allowed, and came out about 20 minutes later. Then, we went to McDonald's, the first time I'd eaten anything but food from the pantry in at least a year. She said the jewelry store needed to borrow that specific ring for a few weeks to clean it up. I asked what I was supposed to tell Becca about what had happened to it, and she said to tell her that I had lost it. I never saw the ring again, and Becca never talked to me again. My father was in hospice, dying of cancer. He had stopped eating and was barely communicative. We knew it was just a matter of days. Mom and I went to visit him every day for a few hours so he wouldn't be alone. One morning, we got a call. Fearing the worst, I answered it, expecting them to let us know he had passed. My father was on the phone, and he sounded well. He even said he was hungry and asked for breakfast. He told me he was looking forward to our visit. I was stunned. He had all these emotions and thoughts, maybe it was a miracle and he was going to beat this. I hop in the car and start driving over. I got another phone call, but this time it was from the hospice folks. He had just passed. The roller coaster of emotions from that morning haunts me. I was numb for a long time. There was a period where I thought maybe I hallucinated and never spoke with my dad that morning. To put my mind at ease, I met with the hospice nurse who was with my dad that morning. She explained this concept, called terminal lucidity. She says it's not uncommon at all and is usually a sign that someone will pass soon. That helped, but it still haunts me. I lost a friend to suicide in the autumn of 2017. He was the first person I loved, and he was also the first, and only, person to properly break my heart, which happened some years before he died. His mental health was always chaotic, and in the months before his death, I distanced myself because I was finding it overwhelming. Something I regret now but also understand I needed to do. I never wanted to not be his friend. I always saw a future with us in a place where we'd be old friends who could joke about him breaking my heart when I was 20. Our friendship never recovered to where it was without the messy love thing, but it was getting there. Since his death, I have realized how much he influenced me to be the person I am today. I really miss him. I understand and accept his death. However, even now, this life without him feels off balance, like something went wrong with the universe. I had so much faith in him getting better. My mom was hit and killed by a driver on her morning walk. My dad stood right next to her and almost hit himself. It happened in a public park on an unmarked crosswalk. The guy never got out of his truck to help as my mom bled out. My dad watched the whole thing. They were married for 45 years. I can't ever get the call from my dad out of my head. He called me while on the scene to tell me mom was dead. The guy who hit her never received a ticket. He got scot off the hook because the DA ruled it an accident. Even witnesses at the scene said he failed to yield. My mom was killed within 2 steps of the curb. Literally, 1 second later, she'd have been okay. The dude hit her on the shoulder. Even the police stated this. He broke the law and faced no consequences. My dad is a shell of himself. When I was 16, I was on my way to take my SAT on a Saturday morning. I pulled up to a 4-way stop on a quiet street and looked both directions. I glanced to my right and saw a car way down the road. I didn't look for more than a second and thought I was good since he had to stop at his stop sign. I entered the intersection and looked to my right again, and the car is already at the intersection. He was going 55 miles per hour on a 25 mile per hour road. He was not stopping. Time slowed down as I realized, oh, he's about to T-bone the side of my tiny pickup truck. So I look away from the window to keep my face safe from any potential flying shards of glass. I white-knuckle grip the wheel and just hope for the best. He flipped my truck, and I rolled onto my side and nailed a telephone pole to the top of my truck. As I'm lying there on my side, I'm feeling all over my body, expecting to be badly hurt and just in shock, but amazingly, My worst injury is a scraped elbow. This was nearly 10 years ago, and even today I drive like a grandma when it comes to intersections. I'll wait an extra few seconds every time if I feel like a car is approaching too quickly. There have been times where a car is coming up quickly and my heart rate will skyrocket because I think I'm about to get hit again. I have never trusted another driver since that day, and being that defensive has never steered me wrong. On the bright side, the guy who hit me immediately called the police, then shoved his shirt through a crack in my door so I could cover myself while the cop broke the window and pulled me out. He broke several bones, admitted fault to the police the second they got there, and personally apologized to my hysterical mother and myself multiple times. As shitty as I was when he hit me, at least he wasn't a shitty person. I still took my SAT too. My hand was shaking from adrenaline the entire time. My dad had a stroke 3 years ago. He has aphasia as a result. Basically, his speech is 95% messed up. He says apple when he means garbage and basement when he means garden. He's only called me my mom's name since the stroke. In his head, though, the comprehension and knowledge are all there. He sounds like he's saying the right words, but only to himself. It's very frustrating. Same thing with writing. He'll write all the wrong letters, but it will look right only to him. He's still here, which is amazing, but he's completely changed now that he can almost never be understood verbally. Life has completely changed overnight for him, and living with him. Now he doesn't talk much. He's really depressed, but what therapy can you get for someone who is nonverbal? We used to have deep conversations, but now it sometimes takes 30+ minutes to understand a single thought of his. The fucked up part is that he's still aware of all the right words, etc. in his head. It's just stuck there, there's no way to get out. My best friend lied about having cancer and that he was dying, basically lying on his deathbed, hospitalized for almost 2 weeks. He took it so far that he faked phone calls from his doctors and nurses. 2 of the worst and longest weeks of my life, having to mentally prepare myself to lose the one person who meant the world to me, and just a few months after I lost my childhood friend. I just feel so incredibly stupid that I fell for it, and I haven't really been able to process it even though it was 2 years ago. I just can't get over it. Fuck you, Julian. My 3rd grade teacher is telling me how her husband went deaf in one ear. I still sleep with a blanket over my ear because of it. He was graduating college, and when he was in his dorm with his roommates, he had started cleaning his ear with a Q-tip. His buddy, I guess, pushed the door open with such force to surprise him or celebrate their graduation that when the door hit him, it jammed the Q-tip in his ear, and he lost his hearing. It still makes me cringe to think about, and since then, I always need something covering my ear when I go to sleep. I'm not sure why I thought it helped, but now I can't do it. When I was a child, I received an invitation to a birthday party. It was handwritten and given to me by the kid whose birthday it was. When I got there, he pretended not to remember inviting me and asked to see the invitation. He denied writing it in front of many of my classmates and said I invited myself. I was so upset that I wanted to leave immediately, but my mom had already left. So I explained what happened to his mom so she could maybe drop me off. Luckily, his mom recognized his handwriting and was clearly angry at her son for being a bully, so she gave him some Lamingtons and a soda and told me I could go play video games by myself until my mom picked me up. That was the day I discovered that none of my classmates were my friend. I was raised Mormon and handed down my 2-year Mormon mission. As a kid, you sing songs like I Hope They Call Me on a Mission. You are told it is the best 2 years of your life. You hear amazing stories from your father, uncles, grandparents, cousins, and teachers at church about the fun they had and about the miracles they saw. And so you get ready to go. You buy the suits, shirts, ties, slacks, and shoes. You see the total bill, which makes your parents' eyes water. You see, they can barely afford to keep you and your 8 siblings fed, so $2,000 for cheap suits, 10 shirts, and nice shoes is a massive sacrifice. But it's all for God, so you know it's right. You get to the Missionary Training Center, MTC, and are surrounded by thousands of others just like you with a shared dream and similar family stories. You are taught to be perfect. You are taught that if you are not perfect, it is your fault when you don't baptize the people in your assigned area of service. And so you forget yourself and go to work, yielding your personal needs to the whims and instructions of the church and your mission leaders. You get to your assigned area, I was in Central America, and quickly realize that it's much harder than you were told. It is not safe, but your companion helps you learn how to identify gang members and keep clear of them. You thank God you're in a religious country where people may disagree with you, but ultimately don't bother you because you're a Christian missionary. One day, when you are teaching a lesson about God, you hear multiple gunshots from 3 houses down, followed by a speeding car. The lesson is over, Everyone needs to know who just died, but everyone is too afraid to go outside just yet. You learn that the people killed in the drive-by were mistaken for the intended target. 2 innocent people died because they were sitting on the wrong stool. You quickly learn to identify if that bang you just heard was a gunshot or a firework. The lessons of perfection are constant. You believe you are a failure because you aren't seeing the success others are. You don't realize until years later that this is a sales job, not a service opportunity. You have enough money to feed yourself, but you often go hungry because the required schedule doesn't allow for dinner until 9:30 p.m. and you're walking 8 to 15 miles a day. Your companions hate you. You want to be a good missionary, be obedient, and work until you can't anymore. They have boundaries, but you don't. You were trained out of them. They hate your fucking guts. You feel so alone. The mission president is not kind or loving. He never talks to you unless required. He only calls when you email him to say your companion threatened to beat you up. You feel so alone. You are alone, chained to someone who hates you. With every new assigned companion, you hope for someone good to work with. With every new assignment, your heart sinks. It's another problem, missionary. You're babysitting again. You feel so alone. You cannot call your parents except on Christmas and Mother's Day. You can send them 1 email a week. You are told to never share negative stories, lest your parents worry for you. You don't tell your parents about almost being mugged by a drunk gang member. Thank God for those kids who pointed you down the alley to get away quickly. You worry about how your parents can afford to pay for you to be there. $400 per month is a lot of money when there are so many mouths at home to feed. You are grateful for the financial help others in your community are offering to pay your way. Years later, you learn that your mission president has all his expenses paid for, including a penthouse in the right part of the city, food, flights for kids to visit, gifts for kids and grandkids, and more. A bat gets into your bedroom through the 4-inch gap between the wall and sheet metal roof. Tarantulas and scorpions make regular appearances in your home when it rains. You serve your 2 years and go home. After 2 years in Central America eating beans and rice, you go to Costco and have a nervous breakdown at the excess of America. You spend $1,100 on a new computer so you can go to college. You feel immense guilt for taking care of yourself. It's been 10 years since I got home, and I've spent countless hours in therapy dealing with it. I hate the Mormon Church so much. I hate what they do to kids and how they take advantage of youth. At the age of 15, I had 2 metal rods and 14 steel screws surgically attached to my spine. It was a 12-level spinal fusion, which is easily the most painful experience of my life, especially considering one of the 5 fours I had was folded over, so I didn't get morphine for the first 24 hours. At 21, I was working at a hospital when a patient began sliding off a bed. She weighed around 400 pounds, had 1 leg, and was useless to help herself. On instinct, I dove in to catch her upper body. 1 steel rod and 1 screw snapped, along with the fusion, which is now solid bone tissue. The breaks happened on 2 separate levels and left 2 sharp metal ends stabbing the tissues around my spine. The workman's comp doctor never looked at the x-rays, and it was 2 full years before we discovered what happened, after 3 trips to the ER. The injury and resulting surgery left me with permanent damage, and I lost 80% of my work functions, meaning, 80% of what I could do on the job, I couldn't anymore. That was 14 years ago. I'll always walk with a limp. I'll never do 95% of the things I really want to. Since COVID kicked my ass, it's difficult just to move boxes or mow the lawn at home, let alone find a full-time job. So, that would be my answer. And for those in the medical field, anything over 50 pounds simply isn't worth it. You could spend the next 80 years a crippled, depressed mess with more medical debt than you can keep track of. I was fast asleep and was suddenly woken up by the sound of loud hums being broken by giggling. I look over, and there's my husband, in some kind of trance, humming and giggling in bed. I shake him. No response. I turn on the light, and he doesn't flinch but begins flapping his arms. He's not a drug user, but I had just gotten home the day before from a 2-week-long work trip and noticed he was acting really strangely, rhyming words when he talked. But now, it honestly looked like he was high AF and was completely unresponsive. I call 911, and the paramedics come. Over that time, he slowly emerges from it and starts talking. His blood pressure is 180/120 while he's sitting quietly. He's a healthy guy in his 30s. They insist on taking him to the hospital. We spend several hours there, and over that time, he begins freaking out at me for calling 911. We're in Canada, so it's free. He takes off his wedding ring, throws it in the garbage, and tells me I'm a horrible person he never wants to see again. That's when the nurse sits me down and tells me what's going on. Bipolar disorder. He's in deep mania and is psychotic. They involuntarily admit him, and he spends the next few weeks coming down from it. At that time, I grieved as if I had watched him die. Watching your partner go completely psychotic is so heartbreaking. They're just totally gone, their bodies are there, but they are not. It took me a long time to recover. He's now, after 2 years, stabilized on the right medications. He's able to hold down a job, he's back to his whole self, and we've talked everything through. It's a cruel disease, but treatable. I went quadding with a man on our second date. On the ride home, after an awesome day exploring the mountain, he lost control of the quad, and we went off the logging road into the trees. A tree fell on my leg, pinning me down. My date, who took a tree to his skull, fell backwards onto me. I was unable to move my entire body, trapped under a man I believed to be deceased. We were hidden in the trees off of a low-traffic logging road, and my cell phone was far out of reach. I remember watching the clouds pass over my head, thinking I would die out there, a slow, painful death. It was terrifying. I screamed for the guy to wake up. He eventually gained consciousness long enough to pass me his phone. I called 911, attempted to stop his bleeding, used some adrenaline super strength to move the tree off of my leg, and crawled out to the road. We both spent weeks in the hospital. My leg was severely broken, and I was hypothermic. He broke his neck, arm, and leg, causing multiple skull fractures and brain bleeds. Yet survived. This happened 2 years ago. It feels like it was just yesterday. Edit, I am overwhelmed by the response this has received. Thank you to each and every one of you for sharing your stories and offering kind words. I'll try to clear up a few things that I see repeated in the comments. Yes, we went on a third date. We ended up staying together for about a year. We FaceTimed each other daily in the hospital, both scared and alone, no visitors due to COVID. We found strength in each other those first few weeks. He didn't remember anything, I remembered for the both of us. He wasn't expected to make it. Comforting him through those dark days, in a way, comforted me. I did not know him long enough to compare his personality before and after the accident. But the things I have learned since leaving him tell me the TBI is not the full explanation for his behavior. Regardless, I hope he receives the care and support he needs. I did my best to guide him towards available resources before I left, getting him set up with a support group and free TBI counseling. I found more support for him than I did for myself. No one deserved what we went through. When I was 16, I hadn't heard from my dad in longer than usual and couldn't get a hold of him. Out of the blue, my uncle shows up, telling my mom that my dad has had a stroke and is in a coma, and since technically she's the closest next of kin, they were divorced, she needs to talk to my sister and me about making choices. Uncle was an old school Vietnam vet, so his weird and distant demeanor wasn't immediately raising red flags. Then my dad's former roommate and friend showed up hours later with similar but slightly different details, creepily hit on my mom, and started aggressively lecturing me about doing right by my dad and letting him go peacefully. Everything was full-blown chaos and very strange. I finally got to the hospital to see my dad, and he looks like he fell down a mosh pit and stayed there for hours. Covered in bruises and cuts, fully intubated, swollen in parts of his head and face, just the works. Plus, it turns out he'd been there a fucking week, and no one told us. Meanwhile, my uncle and aunts knew. When I started asking questions about his condition and such, I was told, he fell down the stairs after he had a stroke, called 911, and lost consciousness, except no one had his phone. My sister and I go to his house and managed to get in, and it was awful. There were blood streaks and spatters all up and down the staircase, and at the bottom, human waste where I'm guessing my dad was lying while or after getting beat, and footprints all over that were not his. The cops were completely uninterested in treating it like a crime scene or even taking statements. Useless cops, shocking, I know. Long story short, after 3 months in a coma and almost a year of rehab, my dad is mostly functional and independent. He says he only remembers bits and pieces, and none of them make sense. His former roommate, whom he had apparently fallen out with, never showed up again. My uncle never explained the delay in telling us, and my dad's phone never turned up. While my dad was still in a coma, our house got broken into and absolutely ransacked, and there were some weird incidents with cars parked near our house or driving by a lot. We lived in a shitty neighborhood, so it might be unrelated, but it felt different. What fucked me up most though, on top of the awful scene at my dad's place, was the secrecy and sudden urgency that everyone had pushing to take him off life support. I've never been able to trust or look at my family the same way. My brother died almost 2 years ago. The last day I spent with him was one of the best days of my life. Next day, He went out riding four-wheelers with his friends and flipped over and was airlifted to a hospital 90 minutes away from where my parents lived. He wasn't wearing a helmet when we had told him time and time again to wear one. 9 days later, I held his hand and told him goodbye after my mom explained that he caught pneumonia, which basically put his body into shutdown. He was 20 years old when he died. He turned that age just 5 months after his last birthday. Way too young. I was 2 weeks from being 19, now I'm almost 21. An age he will never see. I get older, while he has to stay young forever. I'll never get to see him get married and start a family. He'll never get to see me do the same. Now I'll have to explain to the children I'll yet get to have that their uncle is not alive, and how I'll basically have to pound the message of loving your siblings because you'll never know into their heads. And how I now have to be overprotective of them when they want to go out on bicycles, four-wheelers, anything that requires a helmet, and be made the bad mom because you never let me do anything I want to do. All because he was taken too soon. I don't blame him for not wearing a helmet or the hospital staff for not trying more with him. As much as I want to, I can't. I only blame myself for not spending more time with him and taking him for granted a few times. I'm the youngest of 2 kids. I hate being an only child. There was this place on the river where a small bridge created a miniature pool. It was a paradise. One day, we saw firefighter fast boats and an ambulance rushing along the river. They made us evacuate. It turns out a 17-year-old boy jumped from a car bridge just 1 kilometer back and into the river as a challenge. While he was struggling to get out, a 14-year-old girl saw him and tried to save him, but got stuck as well. Fortunately, a local canoeist was around, and he rushed towards the two. He only managed to save the girl. It was too late for the boy. A couple minutes later, while my dad was trying to get the car out of there, a helicopter came over and pulled the body up. I remember seeing the faces of the paramedics when they realized this. His mom arrived, and she couldn't tell what was going on since she was Arabic and didn't speak our language. Her face became bone white when a local managed to translate the only 2 words a mom would never want to hear: "He's dead." It was hard to not remember what had happened when I came back a week later. Death of my dad. I was 15. He fell out of bed one morning, in the early hours. Helped him back up into bed. I thought nothing of it. Seemed okay. Fast forward a few hours later, I had stayed home from school that day. When I checked on him, he was severely lethargic. His lips were a purplish color with white stuff around the edges, and his responses were nothing but gibberish. Being just a teenager, I had no idea what was going on, but I knew it wasn't good. I desperately tried to get a hold of my mom at work for her to come home. It was the longest 30 minutes of my life. When my mom got home, she called 911. Eventually, EMS took him out of the house to the local hospital, where he only lasted 5 days. It turns out it was a heart attack. Arteriosclerosis, to be specific. Ever since then, life has not been easy. I have a lot of anxiety and grief that affect my relationships and my overall quality of life. It's hard to move forward, even if it's been 15 years already. I'm 30. Sometimes I feel like I'm still in that 15-year-old mindset, frozen in that moment of time. I go to therapy, and I don't dwell on it much anymore, but its long-lasting effects feel permanent. The most traumatic thing that I still have unresolvable flashes of is that my father died of his cancer after 6 months when I was 11 years old, and just in the last 2 weeks he went from looking kind of gaunt in his hospital bed to being thin as a twig, and I was away 2 weeks prior to the day he would die. He had pleural effusion, which means that due to the metastasis in his lungs, the fluid was filling them up and making it impossible to breathe, so they started using tubes to dry it out. But cancer is cancer. So it only got worse, and then when me and my sister were told to go home from school on a Friday and my grandparents rushed us up to the hospital after my mom had called, I arrived and started crying the second I saw my dad because he looked like a fish washed up on shore that was just breathing like a dying animal. It took from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m., and then, in the middle of one of his breaths, he simply stopped, and I knew that was it. Around half of the extended family came up to us in the immediate hours afterwards, so there was a sense of a shared experience at least. However, I was 11 years old, and it definitely was a big change in everything about life. I know I'm far from the only one who lost a parent at an early age, though, but it's one of the things that still creeps up in memory now and then. I never cry about it, but I do sometimes think about it. Aortic dissection in my late 30s. I had an aneurysm that burst. 8-hour emergency open heart surgery. I barely made it. Even my surgeon was surprised that I was all there when I woke up the next day. The rest of my body still worked, barely, and I knew who and where I was. 2% chance of surviving it. Never mind, you're still able to walk, talk, and take care of yourself. I got lucky. No stroke. None of my organs died. It felt like heartbreak at first. I went to grab some Tums from the medicine cabinet. I knew as I was walking to the bathroom that something was very wrong. So I ran to my wife's car while yelling, "We gotta go to the hospital." Within 5 minutes, I was screaming in pain. I felt like I was being ripped apart from the inside by flaming, hot pitchforks. They said if I waited for an ambulance, I'd be dead. Everyone this happens to has PTSD. I was told it is one of the most painful things we can experience. I believe it. It's been a few years now. I found out recently that I will need another surgery. The next one will be to replace the rest of my aorta. From just above my heart all the way to my femoral arteries. It will leave me with a scar from my left armpit to below my belt line. 90% chance of surviving. 75% or so chance of coming out of it, okay-ish. Every single day, I have at least one moment where I'm sure I'm about to die. One little imagined flutter in my heartbeat or my breath catches, and I think, oh SHT, here we go. This is it. About 10 years ago, I came home from work on my lunch break. I grabbed a quick lunch and kissed 3 of the 4 kids and my wife goodbye as I was leaving. I thought about giving the baby a kiss goodbye, but she was upstairs, and I didn't want to take the time to do it because I was in a hurry and I wanted to go to the bank and deposit my paycheck. After all, I'll be home in a few hours, and I'll see her then. I got a call from my wife 30 minutes later, screaming and crying. She found the baby dead in the crib from SIDS. To this day, every time my phone rings and I see my wife's name come up, my heart skips a beat, and I expect to hear her blood-curdling screams when I answer. I also wonder what may have been different had I gone upstairs to see the baby when I was home. I don't know that anything would have changed by my going upstairs, but I truly regret not giving my daughter a last hug and kiss. It's been nearly a decade, and I've never forgiven myself and don't know that I ever would or could. Now, I never leave the house without hugging each of my children and my wife, no matter what. I've always been the golden child and always outshined my siblings in academics, sports, and behavior. I was just ahead of the learning curve. Then all of a sudden, everyone my age finally caught up, and every time I failed a test or missed a kick, I would be shouted at by my mom for hours. One day I'm in the backyard practicing shooting my soccer ball, and I miss the net. No big deal, right? It's a very small net, maybe 2 feet by 2 feet, so not a big deal, right? Wrong, it came into a wind chime, and the wind chime looked bad, like all tangled and a mess, clearly broken. I will explain quotation marks later. My mom then came outside, yelled at me, and said, "You have ruined everything out here." I had previously bent some tiki torches the same way. I went to school that day crying. People at the bus stop crowded me and asked what's wrong. That just made it worse and made me think about how terrible of a mother she is. I quietly sobbed through the day as I was remembering different events my mom had done to me by yelling. You know the worst part? When I got home, I fixed the wind chime in like 3 minutes. It wasn't broken, just tangled. It made me feel like I couldn't make mistakes, and that's why I haven't really tried anything new. My mom is out of my life for now, as I am spending the summer with my father, so I have been getting into the things I love more. Culinary classes, soccer, getting into professional gaming, don't ask, and a few other things. Related story, shortly after this moment of Jesus, I realized everything my mother was doing subconsciously, and it had shown through with sickness. My stomach started hurting a lot, with constant headaches and back pains. I went to a doctor for it, and he heard about my family situation and recommended a therapist. That's when I realized how messed up my mom was. I am going to therapy, and my mom has been getting better, but that's because I haven't seen her at all. By the way, I'm a 14-year-old boy.